I have a dream. My dream is not only that you enjoy this episode of Links Pod and that you watch all the episodes of Links Pod that have come before it, but that you also hit subscribe. It will take you a second to do that and help me out a great deal. It's free to do so, so please click subscribe. Thanks.
Links Pod. Tales and entertainment for the people of Lincolnshire with John Marshall.
This week, my guest worked with me then and works with me now. From Links FM to BBC Radio Lincolnshire and BBC Radio Humberside. The man in question is the one and only Sean Dunderdale.
From the Humber to the Wash. Links Pod with John Marshall.
Sean Dunderdale. How are you, Sean?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
I'm looking forward to this one.
Oh, here we go.
We're going to delve in.
I'm the one usually asking the questions.
Yeah.
I've spent nearly 40 years doing that, so I'm not sure about answering them.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
We'll see how that goes.
Let's see how it goes.
A bit of a twist on the tail. Yeah, okay. Well, I've started all these by asking my guest how they got a first interest in radio. What's your story, Sean?
I never wanted to be in radio until about the age of 13. I wanted to be a bus driver, bizarrely.
Did you?
That was when I was growing up. Wanted to be a bus driver. Loved buses. And I was at an event in Scunthorpe. It was a family weekend event, it was called. And it's a bit like, it's not quite the size of the Lincolnshire show.
Right.
But it's bigger than a village fete.
Okay.
And it was at Quibell Park, which is a sports area in Scunthorpe. And so you had, main arena attractions. You had all the stalls there and the charities. John Pertwee turned. He was playing Wurzel Gummidge at the time. It was in the 80s. He was on some float parade. And Radio Humberside were there doing one of their road shows, outside broadcast on a caravan, doing the live show. Presenter called Eric Smith. And I was just wandering around, picking up the freebies like you do, the carrier bags and stuff from stores. And I stopped by Radio Humberside, and they were live on the Saturday afternoon doing the show. And I just watched for a minute, and I got a tap on the shoulder from one of the team saying, do you want to come up on stage and go on the radio and take part in a quiz?
Oh.
And so I thought, well, why not? And so I took part. I did hopeless at the quiz. I came last. But I got a buzz of being live on the radio and thought, this is exciting. This is interesting. And so from that moment, I got hooked on radio. I started following the roadshow team like a stalker. The following week, they were in Cleethorpes. So I was 13, caught the train to Cleethorpes. They were in Hull the following week, caught the bus over the Humber Bridge to East Park in Hull.
Did they recognise you?
And yeah, they
they
started noticing. And then through the winter months, I was begging them, can I come in and have a look around the studios? And I was ringing in for the various competitions that they used to play, the fun and games. And the following summer, they said, do you want to come and help out at the road shows? So I did. I was selling merchandise and we used to make these badges for people. And at the end of that summer, the then boss of Radio Humberside said, do you want a job? And I was like, wow. And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, why hesitant? And I said, well, I'm only 14 as I was then. And his face dropped. And he said, I thought you were 17. I thought you were older than you are. He said, well, we can't give you a job then.
Right.
But he said, knuckle down, keep at it, and maybe get some journalism under your belt because, to work for the BBC local radio, you need a bit of journalism as well, certainly back then. And so that was it. I listened to news bulletins all the time. I was listening to radio all the time. And a friend of mine, the following year, we were 15, school friend, had heard about hospital radio, which I'd never heard of, didn't know hospitals had radio stations. I'd never been in hospital. He said, would I go along? Because I was interested in radio with him. I went along. He managed 3 weeks, and 30-odd years later, I'm still part of the hospital radio station.
Right, so it wasn't for him.
So if it wasn't for him going there, I wouldn't have known about the hospital radio. So I think fate has played a huge part in my life. If I hadn't had that tap on the shoulder, I might have been driving buses. I might have been working at the steelworks like my dad and my granddad. I don't know.
Scunthorpe Hospital Radio, this is?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever, at any point since then, get to drive a bus?
No, I've never driven a bus.
There you are. If you're watching this, Sean needs that opportunity. Then his life's complete.
I'd love to drive a bus.
After that.
Never done it.
That would be great. So what show would you do on Hospital Radio? Variety?
Yeah, well, I started off Thursday night. I used to be the engineer for the 78 RPM show. Do you remember 78?
Was it genuinely played on?
Yeah. And they were all 78 records.
You've made yourself sound older than you actually are.
Very old. But that was the thing. They were fading. Yeah. Wow. There was Joyce and Sheila used to do the 78 show, and there was a stack of 78 records in the record library at Scunthorpe Hospital Radio. Wow. And I think there's still some of them there, to be honest.
Wow.
And so I used to engineer that show, and then from one extreme to the other, I presented the chart show straight after, which was the current hits. Brilliant. Which were all on vinyl at the time, no CD, not even CDs.
So the turntable had you could be 78, 33,
78, 33,
or
45.
Really?
And so I did the chart show on a Thursday. And then I started doing a Sunday afternoon show as well. Enjoyed it. We'd go around the wards collecting requests on a Sunday morning, playing them out on the Sunday afternoon show, and loved it. Yeah.
How was the interaction on hospital radio? Because I did Lincoln, and it was pretty much zero. But to be honest, throughout 3 years I was on hospital radio. Eddie Shaw, when he came in, his hospital radio story involved a lot more interaction than mine. Was Scunthorpe quite
it was,
good with that?
It was very, very good. I mean, what we used to do is we would go out on the wards in the morning, as I say, collect the requests, but also we used to play bingo on the radio. So we'd leave a bingo ticket, and then during the requests, in between the songs, we'd read out a series of bingo numbers, and the patients would be ticking the bingo numbers off, and there'd be a box of chocolates in it for the winner, and then they'd have to call in if they'd won. And it was great. You'd go on the ward and nobody was talking to each other. In the bed next to them, they'd been in there for a week or so, hadn't said a word to the person in the bed next to them. But we gave the bingo ticket, got their favourite request, usually Daniel O'Donnell or something like that.
Yeah.
And then when we went back on the ward to give the chocolate to the winners, the whole ward was talking to each other, shouting across, I only needed one number. And it really, it brought to me the power of what radio can do. And hospital radio is kind of the ultimate local radio because they're down the corridor from where you are. And it kind of brought these wards and these people together, playing bingo, taking part in some of the other games. And we used to get great reaction.
Wow, interesting. Okay, and credit to you, because we will come on to the fact you've remained a part of hospital radio throughout. It sounds like to me Scunthorpe Hospital Radio was a bit more team orientated.
Yeah, big team effort.
Lincoln, I started, and I don't think I saw anybody from the day I started to the day I finished, bar my introduction thing. But you all do things as a bit more of a team in Scunthorpe.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as big a team now since COVID. A number of members left us. And a lot of charities suffering the same. And time's tight, but we're busy with our time. So, we're looking actively at building up that membership again. So it's a smaller team, and we don't see as much of each other. Some members still do their shows from home. And so they don't actually come into the studios anymore because we learned during COVID that we can do things on Zoom.
Yeah.
And use various technologies. So it's not as big a team and not as sociable, although, we try where we can. We had a quiz night a few weeks ago at a local hotel, which was very good, and a lot of fun, a fundraising activity, but a chance for members to mix and stuff. So we try and get that team spirit back.
So you started there, and then you ended up being a professional radio presenter. So let's talk about how that came about.
Well, that was fate.
Well, was it?
It was very much fate. I was at the time, obviously the Radio Homicide incident had happened. I'd been tapped on the shoulder. I got the buzz for radio, and they said, you need to get a bit of journalism experience. And so I was sending off asking for work experience here, there and everywhere. Viking FM in Hull at the time, Viking Radio as it was then, was the local commercial station for kind of Scunthorpe, Grimsby, the Hull area. And I did a bit of work experience there. That was tough because it was the time Margaret Thatcher had just resigned as Prime Minister. And they sent me out onto the streets of Hull, very much Labour Hull at the time, to ask people their thoughts on Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister.
Ooh.
And I'm sure it was an initiation test because none of what I got could be broadcast because it was full of swearing
of course.
angry
people.
They had their views. But that was a good training curve. So I did that. I did a little bit for the Scunthorpe Telegraph. And I sent a letter to the Scunthorpe Star newspaper, who was a weekly newspaper. And I didn't know this, but my letter arrived on the day their reporter, junior reporter, resigned and was leaving.
Oh, wow.
And the editor called me in and sat down with me. And he said, you won't remember this, but a few weeks ago, you were part of the Scunthorpe Christmas light switch on, which we did as part of the hospital radio. That's what it was not as big an affair as some of the light switch ons now, but it was in the precinct of Scunthorpe. The Scunthorpe Star had sponsored it, and I was on stage, introducing the mayor and having a chat with the mayor as you do, and then doing the plunger and getting the crowd to count down. And he said, there was something about you, I saw you on that stage, that made me think you can communicate. You can engage with people.
Right.
So as long as you can know enough about current affairs and journalism, there might be something for you here. So he asked me a load of current affair questions, and thankfully I knew them because I had an interest in current affairs. And so I got those right, and he offered me the job. And he gave me a little bit of legal training for writing for newspapers, and he sent me on shorthand training. Richard Scott was his name. He's still on Facebook. We're still friends on Facebook. Great guy. And so again, if I hadn't have done hospital radio, if I hadn't have done the Christmas light switch on, if my letter hadn't arrived on the day it arrived, who knows?
Fate.
One
thing
there.
leads to another. Before we carry on with the story, let's talk about you at the time, because a lot of people don't know. In fact, I worked you for a long time, and I don't really know about your upbringing.
Okay.
And let's talk about family life back in those days, Sean.
Okay, well, I was born... we'll go right back to the beginning. I was born a twin. There was two of me. And we were premature. I ended up spending the first few weeks. I obviously learned this much later in life. Didn't know at the time. Spent the first few weeks of my life in an incubator. It was touch and go. I had yellow jaundice and various other issues going on. And unfortunately, my twin didn't make it to the incubator. So my twin sadly died.
Wow, sure.
At birth. And so that's kind of how my childhood started. And unfortunately, and it's not necessarily a happy story, and I haven't really told anybody this. Well, I haven't told this. And some of this stuff, even down my hubby, we probably haven't spoken in great detail about. But you asked the question.
Yeah.
I said I'd be open.
And by the way, you did say I could ask anything.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I
have.
have. Yeah.
So anyway, unfortunately, grief is, there was no counselling back then, no, post care for my mum or for my dad. This was the early 70s. And it really did affect my parents. And rather than the joy of having a new baby, I was a reminder of what they'd lost.
Wow.
And again, I only know this much later in life. But as soon as I learnt this, it made a lot of things that happened in my childhood. It sort of made me realise, okay, now it makes sense.
Wow.
And so I was a constant reminder of what they'd lost. And my dad turned to alcohol. Neither of them are with us anymore, but my dad was an alcoholic. My mum had various mental health issues as a result, following what happened, understandably. And so my childhood was not the happiest. Thankfully, I had wonderful grandparents. My granddad and my nana were amazing, and were there as a kind of extra protection for me. But my dad was spending all his money on alcohol, on cigarettes. So there was nothing being done to the house. Often the mortgage wouldn't be paid, and we'd be kicked out of the house. And my grandparents would then end up paying the mortgage so we could get back into the house. The electricity bill wouldn't be paid, so the electric would go off. We didn't actually have, and this sounds really bad, but it's true, we didn't actually have a running bath or shower for as long as I can remember, because it broke and it wouldn't be fixed. The toilet just about worked, but it was wooden floorboards that were giving way. And the house was just in wreck and ruin, and, they just completely didn't care.
I'm amazed at this story. Wow.
Left me very much to myself, which I think is why I'm quite introverted now, because I wouldn't invite friends around. You don't invite friends around to a house in that state. And, if your friend says, can I use the toilet? It's like, no, you can't really.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. You could come through the roof.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you might come through the floorboards. And so, obviously, my grandparents were there. I would get a bath and a shower at my grandparents' house. But it was very difficult, therefore, forming friendships at school when I was a child. And there was an incident I must have been maybe 12, 13, about not too far away from the Ready Humberside tap on the shoulder incident, where we didn't really do holidays, but my mum had said, we're going to go on holiday. We're going to go on holiday this year. And I remember 2 incidents of holidays. One, we did go on holiday. We ended up at Butlin Skegness. It was great. And I can see myself sat on a bench looking out to sea eating fish and chips.
Right.
This other holiday, that was when I was about 7 or 8. This other holiday, though, my mum said, we're going to go on holiday. Your dad can't make it. He's got to carry on working. So don't tell your dad that we're going on holiday. Don't say anything. And so I was saving up my pocket money that my nan and granddad was giving me. And the day of the holiday came and I woke up and my mum had gone. She'd taken the money and she'd vanished. And there was no holiday. She was planning a holiday. She was going away and she disappeared. And nobody knew where she'd gone. And I sort of went to my dad and said, where's mum? We're supposed to be going on holiday. And he had no idea of any of this. And she went missing for a number of weeks and it made front page news because they were concerned for her safety. I later found she'd tried to take her own life a number of times previously and she just disappeared.
Oh, my.
And, that was hard to take in. But because it was all over the newspapers as well, that was quite embarrassing for me to then go to school because all my schoolmates or people at school that, knew about my family and would be asking about where's your mum and various other stories that were then coming out. And so I then stopped going to school because I just couldn't
face
it. But that's therefore where my love of current affairs kind of came from and the newsy side of me, because what I did instead, and don't do this kids, go to school. But what I did was there was a free bus that used to run around Scunthorpe and it took an hour to get to one of the outer estates where there was a supermarket that had opened and it had a cafe. And I used to love going on the bus. It was free, didn't cost me anything. I wanted to be a bus driver, so that was great. I could pretend I was driving the bus. But what I'd do is I'd go on the bus for an hour, 9 o'clock in the morning. I was, let's say, 13, 14, something like that. But they thought I was older. I'd go to the cafe in the supermarket, buy a pot of tea with my pocket money, and I would sit and I would read all of the free newspapers and just read the papers and look at them and read them and take them all in.
Oh, I see.
And so I did that. And then after a while, I'd get back on the bus, another hour trip around town, go back towards near where I was and, get up to mischief in the afternoons when I should have been at school. And I used to do that virtually every day, or at least every other day, catching that bus, going, having a pot of tea. Nobody ever asked me what I was doing.
Really?
I got to know the staff. They'd say, oh, here he is, a pot of tea's on the go and ready. The bus driver would know me. She was always the same bus driver. And I just would devour the newspapers. I'd just read them top to toe.
And did it? Wow.
And that's where I think my love of
current affairs
came in. So that then when I was in front of the editor of the Scunthorpe Star, when I was in front of Richard, and he asked me current affairs questions, it was all in here. And I knew, what made a good headline of a newspaper because I was reading them. I was looking at them in that much detail just to waste away my days rather than going to school. They say University of Life, and I think it definitely was.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It feels like you're telling me the plot.
I'm sorry, I know.
It feels like you're telling me the plot of a film that you've seen recently.
No,
but this is your life.
This is my life.
I'm honestly astonished that we've not had this conversation before today, and I didn't know. I knew there was something there, but I didn't know that it was this, Sean. And did the truancy from school, did that become an issue? Did they start?
Well, at the time, no,
right.
Because they knew there was issues at home. I mean, in hindsight, you'd think nowadays social services, I think, will be getting involved a lot sooner, or getting involved. To my knowledge, nobody came knocking on the door to see where I was. I mean, maybe they did. I was down at the supermarket having a cup of tea. But there was I didn't notice any intervention. And again, I think the truancy officer did call maybe once, certainly was looking into it. But the school themselves knew what was happening at home. And so certainly in those early days, just sort of sat back and said, well, he'll come back when he's ready kind of attitude.
Wow.
Different world now. But I was very much left to it. And so I really didn't go more than 2 or 3 days to school in my last 2 years of being at school.
And did you, at that age, feel like your upbringing was typical of other people, or did you realise that was not the norm?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because hindsight, but I think I knew it wasn't the norm because I did have 1 or 2 close friends,
Right.
and their lives were very different.
Right.
You know, if I went around to their house, I could use the loo.
Yeah.
And you know, I saw close family, and my nan and granddad. They showed me what true love was. You know, my granddad was actually German. He was forced into the Second World War as part of the Nazi youth.
Right.
So he was fighting for the wrong side. He became a prisoner of war and ended up in this country. And as being held a prisoner of war, they were allowed out to work on the land. He was working on a farm where he met my nana, and they started dating and seeing each other after the war had ended. And that was very difficult because obviously a lot of the family then moved away from my nana, because it's like, how can you be literally sleeping with the enemy? You know, how can you that he's a German, and various other slurs were used. But she continued through that and said, no, you know, I love this man. And actually, he was the most gentle man I've ever met. He was so honest, and he went on to be one of the managers at Scunthorpe Steelwork. And he really made a life. He never went back to Germany. He hated what had happened in Germany. He lost all his family in the war in Germany. And he just stayed here and settled in Lincolnshire, in Scunthorpe, with my nana. And that showed me what a true relationship should be, because they were clearly in love right to the end. You know, when unfortunately my nana passed away, sat next to him on the sofa, right to the end. And that showed me what a real relationship was, not the relationship I was seeing back at home with my mum and dad that were clearly being ripped apart.
You're right when you say blow my mind, because you really have blown my mind, Sean. And
Sorry, I know you wasn't expecting this.
I wasn't.
I said, go as deep as you want. I'll be honest.
Well, I'm sure we'll get into some more, but that has blown my mind, and I just didn't realise that you went through all that when you were growing up.
But it's maybe who I am today.
Credit to you to turn out. I mean, because
that maybe the person I am today.
But it could have made you a person who just failed.
Yes, and I think without the support of my nana and granddad, then yeah, I would have gone down potentially a completely different route.
Still be having pots of tea in the cafe.
Yeah, I'd still be having. Oh, I do. I mean, I think that's where my love of tea comes from. I will have tea on a drip if I can. So without, I think that I did at least have that level of support beneath me, if you see what I mean. So I think they grounded some foundations in me that my parents didn't. So without them, I don't know where I'd be.
And what about, we are going to talk about radio as well later.
You sure?
So I would imagine that this upbringing had an effect on your relationships that you've had yourself,
in different ways. I am an introvert. You wouldn't think it, because you give me a microphone, and I come alive.
You can go for it,
But if I'm at an event now, hosting awards or after dinner speaker, when I'm sat around a table with people, I find that quite difficult. The small talk side of it, quite difficult. But as soon as I get the microphone, for some reason, I'm alive, I'm there on stage. And it's the same in family gatherings. If the family's together and we're out for a meal or something, I'm sure they think I'm antisocial or really shy or just rude. And I'm not. I'm just quite quiet and introverted. And that, I think, is because I didn't really have many friends. So my childhood was spent in my bedroom, actually pretending to drive a bus. Some people, you probably wanted to be a radio DJ and was playing records and in your bedroom and radio bedroom or whatever.
I think we all, well, not all, a lot of us in our game have a sort of an on switch that can, even, I've had some bad times, and if I was hosting an event or being on the radio, you probably couldn't tell that I was having a bad time, because we've got a we're on the mic switch. But your backstory certainly makes that more of a challenge, doesn't it?
So yeah,
I can see why.
I can be quite introverted. Holidays, the story about the holiday. We're going away on holiday soon. Really exciting holiday, 10th wedding anniversary cruise. Never done a cruise before, and people are saying, "Are you excited? Are you looking forward to it?" And I kind of say yes, but I can't get excited. I can't look forward because I worry come the day of the holiday, something will go wrong. It won't happen because of that moment with my mum.
Do you think your mum was told you about this holiday because she was thinking of taking you with her? You'll never know.
I'll never know.
You've thought that,
potentially. Yes, I've thought it. Maybe that was the plan, that she would take me and we'd go away together. I'd like to think that, rather than just she wanted my pocket money and get as much money together as possible. You'd think that maybe was the reason, because my dad was abusive, was alcoholic, and so maybe she wanted to get away and take me with her. I guess I'll never know. But with relationships, yeah, I going back to answering the question you actually asked.
It was a while ago now.
I fell in love. I would fall in love very easily.
Oh, right.
Because I wanted that loving relationship that I knew my nan and granddad had. And so I would get engaged. Donna, my first girlfriend, we're still friends now. We dated in August. We got engaged on Christmas Eve.
And were you pushing that?
Will you marry me? She's still got the ring as well. She never gave me it back. Donna, if you're watching, she'll send me a picture of it now and again. So still got it. And then a couple of years later, 3 years later, that relationship ended, met somebody else. And again, after a short space of time, I wanted to get engaged to them. And so...
You wanted something that would last.
Yeah. I was looking for that kind of love that my grandparents had, I guess. And I'd never really had that intimacy, that closeness with somebody. And so I was chasing it all the time. And so that did mean I was going from relationship to relationship to relationship to relationship and going through an awful lot of engagement rings and engagement parties and cakes. But I like cake.
But me too, Sean. Me too. But it's sort of all making a lot more sense. I feel like in the last, however long we've been going, 15 minutes probably, I've got to know you a lot better than I did in the last 30 years, which is quite incredible. So anything I can ask you, you've mentioned some women, you're not married to a woman. Let's talk about that.
Well, I've always been attracted to personalities, to people, rather than whether you're a woman, whether you're a man. And I was, I think I was about 9 when I first realised that I wasn't just attracted to girls. There was a boy, and we were great friends. And we it's a bit personal, but we stayed over at his house, and we ended up sharing a bed together. And we just took all our clothes off. Nothing happened. We didn't know what we were doing. We're 9 years old, but we laid next to each other naked, and it felt different for both of us. And we were just, I guess then started experimenting a few years later in early teens. But I was from Scunthorpe. And Scunthorpe was, men were men. And, it was the steelworks. It was the 80s. And so I naturally fell into dating girls and women rather than boys or men.
But not at this time in the world, and probably more importantly in your family life. You're not going to pop home and say to mum and dad, "Oh no, guess what?"
Absolutely not.
It
was even difficult for my granddad. Because he was part of the, brought up in Germany. And, we know what happened with Auschwitz and the many tragedies and horrors of the world. And it wasn't just Jewish people. It was homosexual people, disabled people. And so I don't think I could ever have come out to him and said, I've now got a boyfriend. Maybe now, if he was still around, things may have changed and I could have, had a proper conversation with him. But certainly back then, no, that wasn't the case. And of course, I wanted to find true love. I wanted to settle down. I wanted to get married. you couldn't marry a man back then either. So if I was going to spend money on engagement rings, it had to be with a woman.
So,
If you see what I mean.
I do. So this had been brewing for a long time.
Didn't mean I didn't love you, by the way, Donna, Angela, and the rest, Carly.
Because if I was to tell the story prior to you just telling the story about you, I remember being at a Links FM party. This is obviously simplifying it, and it's as if you flew out of the closet like this. And went, here's a surprise for everyone. But this had been brewing, you think, since you were 9.
Yeah, it always been within me. But I remember I had a relationship that ended with someone. I was heartbroken by that relationship ending, and I got on a plane and went on holiday. And while I was away on holiday, I thought, do you know what? I've dated a succession of women, really good-looking women. I'm just saying that in case they're watching. And it hasn't worked out. Maybe I should try the other side of my life. And so I decided when I got back from the holiday and stepped off that plane, I was going to be a little bit more honest with people about who I really was. And I'd met a friend he was on a recent Links pod, Anthony Edwards at the Bass Hall.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm not denying any confidences here, but he has always been gay. And we were good friends. And I realised how he was living his life, and that actually people weren't treating him differently. Right. And he was a great inspiration, actually. And I thought, actually, it's all right. You can tell people. You can be quite honest with people. And so I decided that I would just be honest. And I did literally, I think you were on your show at the time, you were in the studio, but I did walk into work and I stood on this big, solid wooden table that was the news desk and just say, gather round, I want to tell you something.
Did you?
And so I just then blurted it out and said, there we go. And then I jumped off the table and said, right, let's go get back to work. And that's kind of how I did it.
Admirable. See, so younger people watching this now will think, what the hell did he have to go through all that for? But because times have changed, and it wasn't an easy thing for people back in the day, was it? And particularly somebody with your backstory.
Back then, certainly not. Particularly, as I say, in Scunthorpe, a steel town. Very much when I was growing up in the sort of, as a child in the 70s and the 80s. No, that sort of thing didn't happen in our town. Okay,
well, later we'll get on to Dan and life as it is now, Sean. But let's go back to this radio story. Yes. The tap has happened. Mm-hmm. BBC Radio Humberside have offered you a job.
Yeah, which I couldn't take.
Is that where? Yeah, couldn't take young. That one.
So then I got, they said, go off and learn journalism. I got into hospital radio.
Yeah.
Then I got the job at the Scunthorpe Star newspaper.
Yes.
And that's when fate came
back
along.
Yeah.
Because I was, by this stage, I was editor of the Scunthorpe Star. Not because I was super qualified, but because I was cheap. And it was a free weekly newspaper.
Yeah.
And the management decided, actually, we only want one person to do this entire newspaper. So to be the reporter, the editor, and Sean's cheap. He's only 19. He'll do it. And I think at the time I was the UK's youngest newspaper editor.
Oh, wow.
And so I was editing the paper. My then at the time girlfriend was the photographer, but eventually they said, no, we don't want to pay for a photographer. You can take the photos yourself, Sean, as well. So I was literally doing everything. I mean, if they'd given me a sweeping brush, I'd have been sweeping up afterwards.
And you were enjoying this? Did you enjoy time there, or what?
Yes, but the goal was to do radio.
Yeah.
But it gave me the opportunity to. I mean, I've got here some cuttings actually from my newspaper days, which I don't know if it will work on camera, but some of the news stories that I did over the years.
Oh, wow.
Various stories about everything.
Written by Sean Dunderdale.
Yeah, all got my name on them. But it also gave me the opportunity to start doing features and to start interviewing people. I mean, there's a certain individual there we won't talk about. But
that was Jimmy Savile, everybody. Yeah.
But I started interviewing celebrities for the newspaper as well, which was also for the hospital radio station, and some great celebs.
Oh, what's his name?
That was Mike Morris.
Mike Morris from TVAM.
Yeah, he used to, various people.
What a moustache.
Absolutely. Henry Kelly sadly passed away recently.
Gone for gold, game for gold is your headline.
And so I was interviewing various celebrities, and it gave me that opportunity. And my very first celebrity actually was David Suchet, who plays, it was just starting out as Poirot on the telly. And I met him by chance. We were on a tube train in London, and you know what tube trains are like? They stop suddenly. And he was there with his wife, his lovely wife Sheila, and the train stopped, and I fell on his wife. And
that's an intro.
Yeah, which was quite an intro. And I recognised him because he was all over the front pages of the TV Times and the Radio Times because Poirot was just starting. And so I then sent a letter the following week and said, look, I want to apologise for falling on your wife. You might remember the incident. But I'm also local reporter for a newspaper. I do hospital radio. Any chance you'd do an interview about Poirot? And he actually phoned the hospital radio station, left an answer phone message and said, give me a call back. I'd love to do the interview. And he was great. He was absolutely great. And it taught me you should always ask.
Yeah.
They can always say yes. They can always say no. But anyway, I was at the School Star newspaper, learning things like that. And this press release arrived. And it was from something called Links FM. It was going to be a new commercial radio station for the area, launching in the new year. And they were looking for people to help out on the station. And they wanted me to put this in the paper. And I thought, I'm not putting that in the paper. Instead, I'm going to put my own demo tape together and I'm going to send off my own CV. And so I'm not giving the opportunity to other people. And so I sent off my demo and I got a letter back saying, if you haven't heard from us by this date, then unfortunately you haven't been successful, but we'll keep you on file. The date came, didn't hear from them. 3 weeks after launch, and I listened to the launch on March the 1st, 1992. I was at home at the time, 10 o'clock in the morning, and then it was a Sunday, so I was then going off to hospital radio. So I heard the launch. 3 weeks later, Rod Whiting called. He was the sports editor as well as part of the news team.
Yeah.
And he said, we've got your details on file. Would you like to come in and just help on the Saturday afternoon sports show? And come in and have a chat with us. So I naturally said yes straight away. Went in. And my job in the early days of Links FM was to rip off the teleprinter as the football results were coming through, the national or the horse racing results, the sports results, and then run them through to the presenter, Andy Marsh at the time, doing the Saturday afternoon sports show. I would ring round the local football clubs every 20 minutes to get a score update, pass that on to the presenter, and then we'd write a little sports bulletin together for the presenter to read, for Andy to read towards the end of his show.
These are the way the pre-internet things happened.
That's how we had to do it. There was no internet, there was no mobile phones. It was all this teleprinter firing off, score flashes and things. Or we'd be watching teletext on the telly then. Remember teletext, CFAX? And so that's how we did it. And we compiled the sport that way. It was the 92 year of the general election. So I offered to help out on election night. I was still working at the paper, but I didn't tell them that I was helping out Links FM for election night. And so I was helping out overnight there. And then if there was the odd holiday cover needed, I'd be putting the paper together on one day and I'd be working at the radio station the next day. And ideally, I'd try and find some Scunthorpe stories that I could also write for the newspaper so my newspaper bosses wouldn't know what I was up to. And
at this time, are you hoping to become a journalist on Links FM or a presenter on Links FM?
I think I'd fallen in love with journalism at that stage, so thought I'd like to be a journalist, although I was still, interested in presenting, so I was a presenter on the hospital radio still as well at the weekends. But it was whatever come along. I just want to get my foot in the door properly in radio.
Yeah.
And whether it's fate or not, I don't know. But there was a big fallout and a change of management with the newspaper a few months later.
Oh, okay.
And they wanted to do things in a slightly different way that I didn't agree with. And I just thought, I've had enough of this. And so I told them I'm off. And I left there and then, just walked out on the day. I had no job to go to. And 24 hours later, almost to the minute, because it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Rod Whiting rang me at home. Again, no mobiles. And he said he had no knowledge of what had happened the day before, hadn't told anybody I'd left. And he rang and said, there's a position come up for a journalist at Links FM. Would you like it? And I said, yes.
I would. Yeah.
And that was it. I started therefore as a journalist reporting, then started news reading and stayed there until, 5 years ago.
So I think a bit there that I hadn't realised myself. You, I presume from all this, don't have a journalism degree then?
No.
You learnt along the way?
I've learnt along the way. When I was told to... I've got some qualification, which the newspaper sent me on, but it wasn't a degree as such. It was some course that I don't know if it was the local college did. There was the shorthand course that they were doing at one place in Scunthorpe, and then somebody else was doing a sort of media course. And so I've got a piece of paper that says I kind of know what I'm doing, but it wasn't a degree. And what I was doing at the time, instead of driving buses in my bedroom at night, I was locking myself away with every book I could find on journalism and on media law and journalism, and just soaking that up.
Sure.
So any knowledge I've got really has come from those books.
So
being self-trained.
That brings me on nicely, because you probably won't show off, but I'll let you. Your career has involved giving a lot of people a leg up at the beginning of their career, right?
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of people that you've done that for, I know.
People.
Absolutely. And I guess some people in the positions you've landed yourself in would say, have you got a journalism degree, yes or no, and then speak no further. But I presume you've been a bit more tolerant of people who haven't, it was
never about having a journalism degree. It was a little bit, I think, from what Richard at the Scunthorpe Star taught me. Can you communicate? Radio is all about communication. Can you talk to people? Because that's the way you'll get a great news story. It's how you engage with people, how you communicate with them. And then we can teach you how to write that into a radio story. We can teach you how to tell that story of yours on the radio.
Yeah.
But have you got the gift of the gab to start with? Have you got the foresight to ask the right questions?
Yeah.
And if you have, then I would give people the chance and just say, come on, what's the worst that can happen? Come on in.
Let's give it a go.
Yeah. I was given that opportunity, and so I wanted to give that opportunity to other people. That didn't mean I veered away from people who had degrees. Some of the people that came through did indeed have degrees. Paul Sylvester, who is now part of the Bauer Group and runs Absolute Radio and Magic.
He's done all right for himself.
He came.
He started with you, yeah.
He started at Scunthorpe Hospital Radio, and we used to do a show together. He went off to uni. He came back. I was then at Links FM. I gave him took him on at Links FM, and look at him now. He's huge in the world of radio.
Yeah.
And he had the degree.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I was turning my nose up saying,
No.
If you got a degree. But it was all about, again, whether it's my personal life, whether it's the career, it's about the individual. If I like the person and I can think, there's something about you.
See what they're doing,
then
where they're going, where they could get
absolutely.
to with a bit of a leg up.
I mean, there was one or two exceptions, but you were there when...
Sorry about that. Yeah.
I'm joking.
Yeah. No, I'll accept that. I'll accept that. No. Right, so we've arrived at Links FM. You've got the journalism role.
Yes.
Okay. Things developed on from there, Sean.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I was because I'd done newspapers, and because I had a bit of media and I'd done court reporting for newspapers, at the time the Links FM launched, it was the Beverly Alec trial, the nurse from Grantham, who had killed a number of babies and harmed others. And so my first role as a journalist for Links FM was to go to Nottingham every day and to sit through that trial. And I got to know the families, and it was live reporting. There was no mobile phone, so I had to rush out of court at a set time, usually for the 1 o'clock news and the 5 o'clock news, find the payphone, and then call into the office, and then they patch me through to the studio. And I was going live, telling the story of what the court was hearing at that moment, and I'd never done that before. And there's a tremendous risk if you get something wrong that the whole trial could collapse. Contempt of court was a big issue. But they trusted me to do it, and thankfully we got it right.
Live. And I was just about to say this, because obviously people will watch this who aren't radio people. There are rules and regulations on what you can and can't say.
Particularly with court cases.
Yeah.
With contempt of court, and you've got to be very careful how you only deliver what's the jury has heard, and
even if the most compelling evidence is in that case,
you can't give your own personal. Obviously, I had a personal view. I was chatting to the families outside, on lunch breaks, and certainly when the jury was out deliberating for that week. But you couldn't put any of that personal across. You had to play it straight.
Facts.
You had to just give the facts. Yeah. You could in no way sway the jury. And we thought we might be all right because Nottingham's a fair distance away. They wouldn't be listening to Links FM. Well, the hotel the jury was in when they were deliberating, because they had to stay in a hotel for a week and weren't allowed out apart from going to court. One of the hotel radios did have Links FM on it. So there was a chance that they could have heard some of our reports.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really careful.
So you're in the deep stuff there.
So that's how I kind of did that for a number of weeks.
And after that, you would probably feel you'd gone up a level in terms of your capabilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Realising them. Yeah.
That, they realised that, okay, he can do this.
He can do this,
And I was doing a bit of live radio. Then I developed into news reading. That took a bit of time because at the time I had a very high-pitched voice.
Okay.
I was really squeaky and I had a broad Scunthorpe accent.
Right.
And so I was told at the time, you need to at least deepen the voice and soften the accent.
Were you?
Yeah.
That's something that's changed in broadcast, isn't it?
Now accents are great.
Yeah.
But back then, again, it was kind of like, it was really high-pitched. I can't even do an impersonation of it. And the sounds, the Scunthorpe sound, it's a little bit Lincolnshire, a little bit Yorkshire.
Yes, okay.
So back and mac and quite for a newsreader, it didn't quite sound right.
Right.
So bizarrely, one half of Black Lace, the people that sang Agadoo,
I do.
taught me to sing, and I can't sing, but the singing lessons, the breathing exercises, brought my voice lower. He taught me how to lower my voice and to soften the accent through singing.
Last week's episode of Links Pod, Sean,
There you go.
Dean Michael from Black Lace.
Yeah, I can't remember which member it was. I don't know if it was Dean.
Yeah.
I honestly can't remember.
Dean joined, if you watched last week's episode, just a little after the big hits, but still on the go, Dean Michael.
Wow.
And he's very interesting.
Well, maybe it was.
Watch last week.
Watch last week's.
No, I was going to say that.
No.
But yeah, if you want to watch last week's Links Pod, then you'll see. Yeah.
So one half of Black Lace taught me to sing, and lowered my voice. And then I started news reading. And from then, as other journalists left, I became sort of the head of the news team. And then the Links FM group expanded, and we started taking on other radio stations.
Yes, I've covered this with some of the other presenters who've been in. So we went from one station to 10 really quick, didn't we?
Very quickly as well. It was very, very quick. And so I became sort of head of news for all of the stations, looking after the journalists, recruiting journalists, training the journalists, answering complaints, which was a job in itself.
Sorry about those.
Yeah.
Generating those for you.
Generating. Actually, my funny story, if ever I did an autobiography, it was always going to be called Burnt Pie and Bath Time.
Okay.
Because of two complaints.
Let's have them.
Which have you got time for?
Oh, definitely.
Bath Time. We had a station in northeast Lincolnshire called Compass FM.
Yeah.
And Eddie Shaw, who's been a guest on Links Pod,
he has.
He presented a kind of nostalgic show on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Lovely show it was.
Yeah.
Some great nostalgic memories. And we moved the time of the show by an hour.
Right.
And a really nice lady rang up and said, well, I like on a Sunday afternoon having my bath and listening to that show. And you've moved it now. You've ruined my Sunday afternoon. So I said to her, straight-faced, why don't you have a bath an hour later? And she called back the following week and said, I had a bath an hour later. It was great. Thank you very much. And that's how that worked. And the burnt,
she still enjoyed it?
And she loved it, yeah.
Right, okay.
And the burnt pie was, we were doing a Christmas light switch on.
Yeah.
And you know what it's like. You do many of these wonderfully as well when you're up there on stage pressing the button and hosting the crowds. And the lights, we say the fun starts at 4:30.
Yeah.
But of course, the lights don't go on until 6:30, 7 o'clock, and we're doing all the build-up.
Yeah.
So we talked about this Christmas light switch on. Fun starts 4:30. We got this complaint from this woman, and she said, I thought you said the lights were going on at 4:30. So I put a pie in the oven.
No.
Went to the event, waited for the light switch on, and when I got back, my pie was burnt. Well, it would have been. It would have been in the oven for 4 hours. And it's like it was our fault. And there was nothing I could say to that.
What does she want? The ingredients
Well, I don't know if
back,
I offered to buy her a pie or just said, well, I'm sorry. We said the fun starts at 4:30. But, they're great little moments.
Absolutely brilliant.
So I was in charge of the news team.
Yeah.
Dealing with complaints as well. And then as the group expanded further, I became ultimately the director of programming, which meant I was in charge of you as well.
In charge of the presenters and the news teams.
I used to, when I gave talks to people, I'd say, I'm responsible for the news output.
Yeah.
So don't if you've got any questions or anything you don't like about the music or about the presenters, it's not my responsibility.
And then suddenly it was.
Suddenly it was. And it was all on my shoulders, and it was all my fault that we kept playing the same old songs over and over again.
Oh, they did say that. No, we didn't.
Which we didn't.
No.
Eddie Shaw will come back and clip me around the ear if I said we did.
Perception on that is a wonderful
absolutely.
thing, isn't it? When
Yeah,
people think they don't like a song, it seems to be on more often.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. You could disprove them, and
Yeah.
didn't Eddie Shaw enjoy disproving people?
Oh, he loved.
Yeah,
he loved getting the.
He loved to
charts out.
disprove.
He loved a spreadsheet. Which could show
They are wrong.
They're completely wrong.
Yes.
And we would feed this back to listeners, but it is perception.
Yeah.
And we'd get complaints, listeners would half hear something you'd said and say, "Oh, John's being rude about such and such again."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'd listen back and I'd say, "Yeah, he probably is.
He was, yeah.
He was being rude."
Yeah.
But that's John. That's
Yeah.
John.
So, our time at Links FM, well, number one, we had a great time, didn't we? They were golden days of radio.
Got to do so much. That was
We
the thing
got
as
to
well.
do so much and interview so many great people, meet so many great people. And when Eddie Shaw was on with me, he asked me my favourite things. And I think it was the team spirit in the building.
Yeah,
and
it's the people.
it was
with-
the people you work with. Yeah.
It definitely was. It was a great group of people, some really creative people, and we didn't have lots of money and a big budget.
No.
So we had to really think creatively to make things work. Whether it was we did this thing called the Big Month Out, if you remember,
Yes.
where we got the local college to give us a van that they tarted up
Yep.
and looked lovely inside, and we took this van on the road, and we every single day for a month we went everywhere, and the aim was to be within about 2 miles of every Links FM listener over the course of a month.
Amazing.
And you went out in the van, I was out in the van, every presenter, the receptionists were going out in the van, the sales team. It was a real team spirit to promote the station, because we didn't have mega budgets to be able to really advertise the station and put big posters up and banners everywhere to say Links FM switches on. So that was the way that we would market the station.
I think even if you live in Lincolnshire, you could become in your little bit of Lincolnshire. When you start having a job that involves you trying to get out and about across the whole of Lincolnshire, there's a lot
There's
of
a
it,
lot,
isn't there?
yeah.
There is a lot. We would sometimes drive an hour and 20 minutes to get 5 minutes of audio, drive all the way back again. And this is after, in my case, probably doing the breakfast show. And then you get back into the building about 2:00 in the afternoon. You're absolutely shattered.
Yeah.
But that was,
And
that 5 minutes might have been a good 5 minutes that you got.
And again, in the early days, it was before, I know I'm sounding like an old fart, but it was before mobile phones. It was before some of the digital technology for microphones and stuff. I mentioned Paul Sylvester earlier, memory of him as a journalist. Louth Hospital, I think, was closing, or maybe Horncastle Hospital. And we'd been to this press conference,
Right.
and it was big reel-to-reel machines, the interviews. And we needed to get this back for the 5:00 news. And so I was driving, and he was in the back of the car with a reel-to-reel machine and a razor blade, because you had to slice the piece of tape where you wanted the edit to be, and then
Yes, you
stick
did,
it together
yeah.
with a bit of sort of tape.
Yeah.
And that's how you edited stuff, to take words out or sentences. So I'm driving around Lincolnshire's roads, him with a razor blade on the back seat, trying to do this, without hurting himself, and trying to edit this piece. And then we rushed into the studio and stuck this tape on the machine and just pressed play, and it went out in the 5:00 news.
Amazing.
And, crazy things that we used to do like that.
No digital editing
No,
in those days.
not at all. How times have changed now. Whereas now, well, look, you can see what you're doing here.
So, well, indeed. So you famously, of course, became not only the journalism, but you were a presenter as well. Saturday afternoon, I always associate with Sean. Your knowledge of sport was very good. Or it appeared to be, anyway. I know we can do the magic of radio, but did you have an interest in that?
Well, I was. People would say
develop
no
one.
because I'm a
Right.
Scunthorpe fan, so obviously not. Not a great deal of interest, but
Right.
I always tried to know just enough.
Yeah.
We did the Air Show Radio, Air Show FM, for the Waddington Air Show for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
And people assumed that I knew everything there was to know about aircraft, and I didn't. But I learned to know just enough that I could ask questions of somebody else.
Sure.
I took on the farming programme and did the farming show. Indeed, I still do Farm Watch on Radio Lincolnshire.
Yeah.
And people assume I must have had a farming background. Well, apart from my nan and granddad working on the land when they first met, and my uncle having a farm near Barnaby, I had no farming background, but I learnt enough and was asking the questions that a listener might ask. And so it's just knowing just enough that I could convince people I knew what I was talking about. And it was the same with sport. I could watch a little bit of football. I couldn't do commentary. I take my hats off to Michael Horty and Rob Makepeace and the team at BBC Radio Lincolnshire and all the commentators around the country for the commentary they do, because I just couldn't do that. I tried once. It was the Women's FA Cup final. It was at Scunthorpe United's ground. Doncaster Bells were involved. And I tried to commentate for Scunthorpe Hospital Radio. And it was hopeless. I couldn't see who you've got to keep an eye on the number on the back of the shirt, and then have the name in front of you as to whose that is, and who's just scored, and were they offside, and
who they played for last season.
And it was just like, no, commentary is not for me. I can give a little bit of sports knowledge, but there's no way I could do commentary.
Brilliant. I want to get on to. I was at Centre Parks at the time. You phoned me up and said it's been sold. We've covered this on the pod with other people, but tell me about that time when you found about the Links FM thing. I presume you found out quite a while before the call.
About a week before. Right. I'd been to one of our other stations, Rutland Radio, fantastic little radio station, which kind of is still going. Rob Bassani, who was the station manager and the breakfast presenter for Rutland Radio, has kept it going as a really great community station.
Yes, he has, yeah.
Stanford and Rutland Sound, have a listen online. And so I was at Rutland Radio, and I got a call to say, can you come and see the chief exec? And I thought, okay, a bit weird, but okay, I'll come back. And I thought I must have done something wrong, or there's been a complaint about somebody. What's John done now?
Yeah.
And so I arrived back at sort of about 6 o'clock in the evening, and it was deliberate so that there's nobody else in the office. And he called me in, and he was there with his PA, who was also head of HR. So I thought, oh, this is serious. And he had a piece of paper in front of him. I thought, this is really serious. What have I done? And I was you rat through your mind.
Yeah, I
thinking,
do.
What have I done? I bet if I called you into a meeting, you think, what have I done?
Yeah, what is this? Yeah.
Anyway, he read this piece of paper that said the group has been sold. It was all done by lawyers, the statement that he read to me. And said that it's been sold. He wouldn't tell me who it had been sold to. They couldn't confirm that, but that an announcement would be made at this date. And I wasn't to tell anybody because it would have market impact on the stock markets and various other issues.
Sure.
And that was that. And he said, we'll talk more about it the following day. And so I had to then walk out, and I was devastated. I went home, I sat in my kitchen and just cried. I remember thinking, wow, we've built up Links FM. It's such a huge success. And it's a business. The investors ultimately wanted their money out of it and wanted to, make some money from it. I understand that. But it just felt like, the world has gone.
Yeah, well, I've spoken before. What we had experienced that we haven't said yet on this one is a lot of similar offers have been batted away, haven't they?
Yes, they have.
And therefore, I think we became a bit complacent.
Yeah.
That all offers ever will be batted away.
Yes, yeah.
And we'll be here forever.
What changed was we had an amazing chairman, and he sadly passed away a year before, almost a year to the day of the announcement being made that the sale had happened. And he was very much, he didn't want to sell, and him and with the chief exec were very firm that this is ours, this is our little toy set, the train set, and we want to run it the way we are, and they won't be able to do it the way we can, and we can make money out of this.
Yeah.
And they were making money out of it. And sadly, when he passed away, I think that one of the key figures that was arguing for it to remain as an independent group had gone. And I think the other investors were then pushing to say, we think it's time now to sell.
Sure.
And so, I was told that I would have to make the announcement to all the staff at Links FM, gather everyone together at 9:30 on that Tuesday morning the following week. Obviously, you were on holiday. There was nothing we could do about that, so I had to call you.
Or phone call, ruin my holiday.
And tell you, and ruin your holiday. And there was a couple of other people I had to call. And I had to stand up in front of everybody and say, sorry, folks, but, the station is being sold.
I still get emotional when I think about it. I do.
I tried to be positive and say, I hope that they will realise what they're getting here.
Yeah.
And the amazing people that they're getting, and that they will continue it and make a success of it.
Wow. Well, and you also started plotting, presumably, your exit. Because
I feared that. Well, not necessarily I suppose my exit, but I feared what might happen.
Yeah.
because I'd seen what had happened at other radio groups.
Management is usually the first area.
Yeah,
to
management's
be...
the first to go, but also I thought, again, I'd seen this with other big radio groups, that what they were doing was they would shrink down, the presentation team, the journalist team, all of the team really, because they wanted to do what's known as networking. They wanted ultimately Ken Bruce to go across the country.
Sure.
And so I 2 days later, and I found the email yesterday. Actually, it's on my phone. I fired an email off to Charlie Partridge, who was at the time the managing editor of BBC Radio Lincolnshire.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really my escape route, but I was offering you and everyone else to Radio Lincolnshire. Yeah, because I wrote a letter because it was a standing joke. A lot of the particularly the journalists who moved on fast a lot more than the presenters. One thing that was great about the Links FM group was stability. When they had a presenter, they looked after those presenters.
We were staff members, and that was a rare thing in radio, wasn't it?
Journalists, again, we trained them up, but they wanted to go off. They were competitive, and so it was seen as the Sean Dunderdale arm of BBC training kind of thing. Yeah. In that we would train them, and they'd then go off. And they're right around the country now. So I sent this letter 2 days after it was made public about the sale, and this email to Charlie that said, "I fear the changes coming will mean the end of the Sean Dunderdale arm of the BBC training unit, but I've got one final group of students should you be looking for creative individuals to join your team, because I feared that they may start cutting back, and I didn't want the people I was working with to lose their jobs."
Sure.
So I said, we've spoken about presenters before. Joseph is a star in the making, full of creativity and ideas.
Yeah.
John Marshall is John Marshall, a tremendous character, well known, loved by the listeners, and always a great listen. I then talk about some of the journalists.
Thank you.
And I said, if Radio Humberside needed someone, then any of the above would be great. But I'd especially mention Ross Carrick, good presenter, equally good, great producer, who used to nag to sit in on my Saturday show when he was 11, and he went off to Compass FM and KCFM in Hull as well, and again, a creative mind, a great producer as well as presenter. And of course now Ross Carrick at the moment he's part of BBC Radio Lincolnshire, but he's on attachment as a producer of the breakfast show on Radio Humberside, the biggest show on Radio Humberside. And so that came to be, not necessarily because of my email.
That's really nice.
But and obviously you're now involved with us at BBC Radio Lincolnshire as well.
I have got my foot a little bit in the door now, Sean.
So I sent that, and at the bottom of the email I said, and of course, I like reading the news. So if you need someone to help out, I think I say in the email, if even if it's just making tea on election night, or standing in for Alan Stennett to do the farming programme, give us a shout. I'll do a bit of freelance work. Always up for that.
And he did give you a shout.
Well, yeah. So we went for a coffee and we chatted. And I thought we were chatting about, this was with Charlie Partridge and Maggie Curtis, who's now the overall managing editor of both Humberside and Lincolnshire. And I thought we were just meeting for a coffee to chat about you lot, really. And get the gossip on what's going on at Links FM and what Bauer might do when they come in. And within about 5 seconds, they said, "Do you fancy doing the breakfast show?" And I wasn't expecting it at all, but I said yes before they'd even finished the sentence. So joined BBC Radio Lincolnshire early March 2020, and 3 weeks after starting the breakfast show, we went into lockdown and COVID happened, which was a remarkable time to be doing a speech-based BBC radio show.
Yeah.
And an honour to be guiding people through that horrendous time.
Yeah.
For the first 12 months of that breakfast show, we were very much seen as a friend to people in the community, and trying to unite the community and offering reassurance, I guess, and companionship, which is what radio's great at, companionship. And so that was a tremendous honour. And, people joked and said, God, they said if you ever left Links FM, the world would crumble. And I left Links FM, and we crumbled a little bit with COVID and lockdown. So that was an amazing experience. Humbling, really, some of the people that we spoke to during that time.
Yeah.
Then the invasion of Ukraine started, and we had a lot of communities getting involved, wanting to send clothing and material to Ukraine, and we had Ukraine people coming over to live and settle here because of the war. Then we had the death of Queen Elizabeth and the coronation of King Charles. So during my period on the breakfast show, there was kind of 4 massive events that would challenge and would normally be a once-in-a-lifetime event for any presenter. and I had 4 of them in my time on the breakfast
Wow,
show.
wow.
And so it was kind of like, maybe I'm the jinx. Maybe I should come off the breakfast show and do something else, because what on earth could happen next
In the world.
Yeah, and now of course I'm doing the fantastic weekend shows.
Yeah, and they are great.
Which is also on Radio Humberside.
Yes, of course.
Where that tap on the
where it
shoulder
all started.
happened. Yeah, I mean, one day maybe
Full circle.
Maybe they'll let me do an outside broadcast roadshow in Scunthorpe, so it really is full
Imagine
circle.
that.
But yeah, and really enjoy my time at
And this
both
is the
BBC
time
Lincolnshire and
now,
Humberside.
because we all know, we can speak freely because we're not there. That the things Bauer have done to these radio stations are probably you would describe as great business decisions, but in my opinion, not great radio decisions. And
as a lover of local radio, I
Yes.
understand why they've done it.
Yeah.
It is a business decision. I'll be honest, I worry whether the Links FM group would have got through COVID lockdown.
yeah,
Because of the advertising revenue dried up, and you probably needed a big
Something big.
group
Yeah.
like Bauer to keep the radio stations going.
I loved working for them and I enjoyed it, but it's gone to a point now where local is sort of a
It's
fiction.
like it's a dirty
fiction,
word,
really.
local.
Yeah. Well,
and, you
they're
know,
trying to suggest some things on it are local, and really most of it is not.
Most of it isn't,
Yeah. Nobody
it's-
popped to the big Tesco in Lincoln the other day,
No,
and then they're on the radio the next day with their story.
You
of
lose
that.
those
No,
stories.
That's gone.
Some great local community stations, and some of those online stations are mini commercial radio stations almost, and they're doing great work. But those big heritage FM stations, you won't get those local voices on there anymore, hardly at all. For me, the power of local radio, I in the early days of Links FM, when it snowed, I did the overnight show live. And again, mobile phones, I mean, even now, mobile phone signals in Lincolnshire are bad. Back
in
then,
places,
there wasn't any. And there was a goat in difficulty about to give birth in the snow on a farmer's field. And the vet was stuck, couldn't get there. What the farmer had was a little radio. And the vet could make contact to me, because obviously his phone had a signal to me. And I was then passing on information to the farmer in the field via the radio in the middle of the night at 2:00 in the morning. And the first goat that was born, the kid was named Sean. So I've had a goat named after me. And that's the power.
Not a sheep, not Sean the sheep.
Not Sean the sheep,
Right,
it was
okay.
Sean the goat. But that's the power of proper local
in
radio.
that proper local radio. And this is the time for the BBC to shine.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, because they're still doing it. Fantastic.
They've had to make some changes because a lot of people do consume their news online, on digital. And they want to be all local, not just local radio, but yes, you get your local news online. They're a trusted source that you can get. The social media, you've got the local TV with Peter Levy there with Look North doing great work.
Absolutely.
And then you've got the radio stations as well. And what they've done with the changes they've made is to invest more in local with the same money they've got and just do it in a slightly different way. And I would hope, there was concern at the time when these changes were coming, that people thought local radio will never be the same again, and we're losing localness. But actually, I would hope if people listened, they would still feel they're getting a local radio service from their
without a doubt
local station. And at night time, it is a national service. It's a program that goes across the country. But when I was starting out, it was only 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. that local radio was local.
Right, yeah.
I think they took Radio 2 overnight on the local networks. Radio Lincolnshire, when Links FM first started, it was a shared afternoon programme with the great Dennis McCarthy in Nottingham.
Yeah.
So having an afternoon show that now is also shared with BBC Radio Humberside, but has proper local opt-outs, not just a throwaway little remark here and there, still feels local. But is no different to how it was
back in the day,
many years ago,
Yeah.
when these stations were a success.
And I'm only the new boy doing a bit of cover work, but what will remember forever now, when I first walked in, when an opportunity came up for me at the BBC, it felt like the old days of Links FM in that office. They're a great team. There's people, there's a great team.
There's people
banter
there working on socials, on online. The news team, the TV team are there, the radio team, and we all gel well. And like I say, there's that banter there, that friendship, And we're all there, as we were back in the day at Links FM, we're all there for the same reason. We want to make great local content, whether that is local content that's going on the BBC News website, whether it's going on the regional TV station, whether it's going on the radio station. We all want to make great local content and to really give a voice to Lincolnshire. And that's what they're all doing, and we're having a bit of fun while we're doing it in the office.
Yeah. What had happened by the end of the Links FM time and then Greatest Hits Radio is the staff had dwindled further and further and further. And you'd walk in sometimes and there might be 2 of us, 3 of us in the building.
Yeah.
It may not have sounded like that on air, but it certainly wasn't the same. We used to sometimes say, we wish the microphones were in the office as much as they were in the studio, because
things
some great things
and that's
happened
the good
in
thing.
there.
When you've got a group of people who are creative and who are having fun, you can bounce those ideas off people. You can have that banter in the office and think, oh, I'm going to do that on my show later. That was great.
Yeah.
And it's giving you that extra fun factor to put onto the radio. And unfortunately, if you're sat alone in your office on your own, you can't really do that.
No. We all know you. Those.
I mean, you did. You were still great on the radio. I'm not saying,
Yeah,
when
but
you were there. But I don't know. The creative juices aren't necessarily.
We all have those things, don't we? Where you might sit in your office and have an idea, and you come out and say it to everyone, and by the time you go back into your office, it's changed into an even better idea because of everybody. And that can still exist at the BBC, but it stopped existing down the road where we were.
But I imagine it's existing in Manchester and London, where Bauer are.
Yeah, I'm sure they're still doing their thing.
Doing a lot of their stations.
Yeah, they're still doing their thing.
That is happening, and they've got a great team doing it there.
Of course, they've got a great team. Yeah,
no longer in Lincolnshire,
but not the local thing in Lincolnshire.
That big building on Waterside South in Lincoln is very empty.
Yes,
sadly so.
Yeah,
I've got lots of happy memories there.
Go on, me too, Sean. I said that one of the most difficult things, I don't know if it was for you, we will finish in a second, but the autopilot of driving there each morning, that was one of the hardest things for me, because for the years that we were there, you would go to that same location every day, not just... And then the people came after that, and then doing the radio came after that. But driving to the same place, I found that very difficult when I had to wake up on a Monday and not drive there anymore. Strange.
Very strange.
Strange. But long live the BBC and local radio and what we're doing now. Is
local
there anything
radio
else?
Will survive. Local radio will continue in a different way.
Yes.
I'm sad that maybe the opportunities aren't there for people today.
That's true.
Rob Hammond would work at Mr. Chips in Louth, and then he'd do the overnight show. And that was a way in.
Make his way up the ladder.
And make your way in, And I was given opportunities on the Saturday afternoon show to get my foot in the door and to work my way in. Those opportunities sadly aren't there anymore to that degree, but hopefully, people will volunteer for community stations. Hospital radio is still a thing, not in Lincoln, but Scunthorpe, Grimsby, Lincolnshire Hospital Radio in Boston. So there are ways in, but it's not as easy as it certainly was for us.
Sean, thank you so much for doing this today.
Pleasure.
It's a great episode, I can tell you. Now, we started with a pretty sad story. I think we should end with asking you, are you happy these days?
Oh, very, yes.
Yeah.
Married to, obviously, Dan, my hubby. We met, again, fate by chance. We were in Starbucks in Lincoln.
Right.
And he was there with some mates and sent a mate across to say, my mate fancies you.
Really?
And we got chatting over a coffee. And, here we are now, 10th wedding anniversary coming up. We got little Mitzi the Cavapoo. All's great, really, there.
So we end with a happy end to the story, Sean.
Happily married, happy relationship.
Yeah.
I think I've got the work-life balance right at last as well. With working as I do at BBC Radio Lincolnshire and Humberside at the weekends as well. Still on the radio, still loving life, really.
I think you should give me some tips on all this happiness stuff.
I'll try my best.
I might give this happiness a go sometime. Sean Dunderdale, thank you.
Thank you.
This is Links Pod.
Next week, the first of 2 episodes I've been working on for months. This is Bomber County. Aviation plays a massive part in the history of Lincolnshire, and we're getting into that. You'll love them. Don't miss them. Catch you next week.
Links Pod. Never miss an episode. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.